Buenos días.
Good morning, Mr. President. I would like to start by speaking briefly on behalf of the Union of South American Nations, UNASUR, composed of Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, Paraguay, Peru, Suriname, Uruguay, Venezuela, and Chile. UNASUR is a forum for integration among South American nations to meet the need of the countries in this part of the world to speak together with one voice in order to meet common challenges. In this context, UNASUR very much welcomes the convening by the President of the General Assembly of this United Nations Conference on the World Financial and Economic Crisis and its impact on development, which will show the world that the United Nations has an important role to play in issues related to the economic development of its members. For this reason, those of us who compose this union will actively support the implementation of the outcome document of the conference to ensure that it becomes an effective tool for joint and coordinated response to the impact of the world economic and financial crisis on development. This being said, I shall now address the General Assembly in my capacity as head of the Chilean delegation to this conference, and I have the following points that I would like to emphasize. Mr. President, this conference is the worst financial and economic crisis since the Great Depression, with much uncertainty as to whether the worst is not yet to come. And this is an example, the convening of this conference, of the vitality and ability of the organization to respond to the major challenges of our time. The economic crisis was viewed as a widespread crisis threatening to cause major setbacks in rates and levels of progress being made by the various countries and therefore the quality of life of their inhabitants. But reality has been worse than what was initially foreseen. This is illustrated, and this also relates directly to Doha, that the impact of world crisis do not affect everywhere in the same way. They affect the most vulnerable more, and the less developed as well. Countries that have nothing to do with the origin of the world financial and economic crisis are nevertheless the ones where its adverse effect is most strongly felt. This is reflected in greater unemployment, a higher incidence of poverty, less gender equity, hunger, more malnutrition, and other setbacks in the achievement of the MDGs. Mr. President, this crisis has presented us very starkly with major challenges. It has revealed our weak spots and has given us tasks and responsibilities in both the multilateral and national arenas involving emergencies, responsibilities, and commitments. First of all, speedy and urgent action is required to mitigate the effects of the world financial and economic crisis and its impact on development, especially in the development of the most vulnerable, lower-income economies in which social problems are most acute. At the global level, specific measures are needed, firstly to stabilize the financial markets and restore the confidence of economic agents, and secondly, to bolster commitment and solidarity, especially of those who bear greater responsibility for the financial and economic crisis towards the most affected developing economies. In this sense, we point to the importance of the final document of the conference. It gives a great deal of importance to the rise of liquidity at the world level in order to overcome the financial crisis, particularly by raising the allocation of special drawing rights and also examining their use in development goals. Each of our nations, in turn, must remain alert and do everything possible to prevent the deterioration of social indicators and the living conditions of millions of people in the economies that are lagging furthest behind, and, accordingly, assess the need for additional financing. The least developed countries have an even greater need for resources in this situation, so as to pursue counter-cyclical policies that will allow them to heal their economies and maintain and extend their social protection systems. We know from past experience that ground lost in the social sector takes more than twice as long to recover compared to the recovery of economic indicators. Secondly, we cannot lose sight of the origin of the financial and economic crisis and the conditions that allowed it to happen. We must take steps to ensure it will not happen again. We are paying for the imbalance between market and government carried to an extreme. The weakness of the systems of supervision and financial regulation, together with the irresponsible behavior of the persons involved and the lack of transparency, resulted in excessive risk-taking and an unacceptably high price for certain assets, all of which precipitated a series of economic contractions. In turn, we have to redesign the global financial architecture so as to establish regulation, monitoring, and supervision mechanisms that avoid systemic risk and avert new financial crises and protect people. Financial stability is a global public good. It requires broad leadership capable of creating this new financial architecture at the global level. We believe that in the United Nations, the G192 is the forum designed to spearhead this process most actively and to ensure that it is correctly designed and implemented. Thirdly, and no less important than the foregoing, the challenge in the medium term is to move more rapidly towards global economic convergence. This is the time to redouble efforts to implement the Monterrey Consensus, to give more decisive support to the innovative financial initiatives of the campaign against hunger and poverty, and to move towards fair trade that removes protectionist barriers and gives special treatment to the least developed. Finally, I would also like to mention that while the financial and economic crisis and its social impact have extended to the various regions and countries of the world, their magnitude has varied. Credit is due to the countries that have made a greater effort and have been responsible in their economic behavior. For instance, the crisis found Latin America in better shape than on previous occasions. In the specific case of Chile, fiscal discipline based on countercyclical policies and structural balance rule implemented from 2001 enabled us to reduce the vulnerability of the national economy to financial crisis and fluctuations, and to preserve ongoing social programs, and even launch new ones. Savings derived from the application of broad countercyclical fiscal policies, reflected in aggressive programs of investment in infrastructure and housing, the securing of financial inflows, support for small and medium-sized enterprises, improvement of employment insurance, increasing benefits and coverage for the Social Security reform, employment programs and subsidies for young people, increase of benefits for childhood, and extensive temporary tax relief measures. All these were made possible, but this does not make us immune to the crisis. It does, however, mitigate its impact. To sum up, the financial and economic crisis we are confronting presents us with major challenges. To tackle them requires major global leadership. In view of the organization's legitimacy and capacity, this leadership must be assumed by the United Nations. As a result, this conference is an important milestone, and we are sure it will be remembered as a multilateral moment in which we succeeded